In terms of context, for those of you who are new to the idea of the Northern Forest, those of you north of Albany may actually just live and work in the Northern Forest, but here's the base map of what we consider the Northern Forest region. On the western edge, the Tug Hill Plateau through the Adirondack Park into the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, the northern three counties of New Hampshire, and essentially, as you can see, the great majority of the state of Maine. That is, on a political level, these counties, 30 million acres, 2 million people live within the Northern Forest region. And the commonality is the actual topography and the ecological base of the Northern Forest itself. That is what connects the region from a physical sense. And what we unearthed more definitively through this study was the socioeconomic connections across the region as well. Before I get into that, a little bit of background on the center. Quickly, we take three disciplines and work in concert with the three of them. Economic development, community development, and environmental conservation. The belief is that this three-legged stool is the way in which it really can move forward in the region, thinking about the issues facing the four states and collective. We have three main areas of work. One is regional coordination and advocacy. That is the study, that was the strategy we pulled together, was part of that. We have a sectoral strategy program area that we're working on. Involves sustainable forestry, tourism, ecosystem services, and local renewable energy opportunities. The center is a 10-year-old nonprofit organization working across the region. It really came out of the idea that environmental conservation cannot be done in isolation. It has to take into consideration the economic community development of the region in order for us to advance all the challenges that face the region. And when looking at the Sustainable Economy Initiative in itself, it was to say we've got an idea of these common challenges, and we've got an idea of what they are, and we could sit down and we could come up with a report to say this is what they are, but we need to go deeper into it. These are issues that you're very familiar with as we look across the region: changing industries, transfers of land, job loss, global competition, education issues, a lack of IT infrastructure, youth leaving the area, climate change, energy costs. When we talk about our skiing opportunities, which I am looking forward to, it is a challenge when we look at climate change. How do we handle these seasonal industries and the tourism that we rely upon as a region? It is something that we can look at this list, but we drill down to specific community levels. You can look at Lyons Falls in New York, Berlin, New Hampshire, and Millinocket, Maine. All three in a transition of losing, or impending loss of pulp and paper mills, and what that does to the different communities that host those, and how each of them are looking at similar or sometimes complementary ways to come out of that decline in manufacturing. To go a little deeper in some of these different issues, we have three slides that look at some of the demographic changes and shifts that were unearthed during the study process. The first one here, which is, and I've only picked out three of the many different trends. First one is really change in total population. Many state governors, other folks look at the loss of youth as a real challenge for the region. In this case, you can look at Essex County and Carroll, Grafton counties over in New Hampshire as having similar similar rates of youth leaving the region, and a challenge of how you replace it from workforce development, how does that affect communities, so on and so forth. So you can see the color gradation, okay, but the loss in percentages has hit northern Maine the most, but does extend into the Adirondacks itself. We look at the quality of the jobs and looking at the wages that are earned. Manufacturing certainly is one that's looked to as having a high wage as well as benefits. But what we're seeing, obviously, in the reduction of manufacturing jobs and increase in tourism and other seasonal related jobs is not a parallel increase in the wage that you'd like to see compared to the national average. I think that is it. One county within the park is actually within the range of U.S. national average, and the rest are below. So you can see from a wage perspective, we're lagging behind the nation. And then one other trend that some see as a negative, others see as a benefit, the percentage of total housing units for seasonal recreation or occasional use. In some cases, when you have up to 6 out of 10 homes in a community that are owned by out of region or out of the community interest, it definitely has an impact on the fabric of the community. And this is one that again, it could be seen as an economic opportunity for property maintenance organizations, businesses like that, but it does have an impact on how our school boards, how our local community volunteers are really staffed and driven. To 10 actions, I'm going to run through them very quickly here. Across the 30 million acre region, 26 million acres are forested. So it seemed like a pretty good deduction that the first major tenet should be keep forest as forest. Not to say agriculture doesn't have a role, because it's a very important role. It doesn't mean that community development and communities don't have a role, they absolutely do. But the fundamental underpinning of land transfer and the fragmentation of land and the increasing development of that land has a great impact on our community, economic, and environmental well-being. Second piece is looking at this economic spark. How do we really look at sparking and catalyzing economic activity in the region? It fundamentally comes down to, over the past 30 years, we've seen a radical shift from large manufacturers employing over 33% of the region's labor force to a reduction of roughly 35,000 workers down to it being about 12% of the total employment in the region. The generational going to the mill, working in the same type of system, doesn't exist anymore. And what needs to come into these communities is a real framework of creativity and entrepreneurship. And that's not something that's easily taught. It is a culture. It is something that needs to be driven. And we really need to look at how we advance that by developing a climate where business can grow, developing learning programs where creativity and entrepreneurship is fostered. From a regional marketing perspective, over 70 million people live within 1 day's drive of the Northern Forest region. And we have to compete for those 70 million in the global marketplace. So each state has done a massive amount of investment into their each state brand. But we can look at a family of brands across the Northern Forest, and that's critical for us to be competitive in the global marketplace. And finally, this idea of buying local to keep wealth within the region, this goes beyond sort of the buy local movement of locavore, of farmers markets. This goes to a fundamental economic driver that one study estimated about $6 billion was outflowing from the region for heating fuel, primarily fossil fuels. Not driving around in our cars, but really fundamentally heating and generating the economic development of the region. That's a fundamental loss of local wealth that is staggering. And we need to look at how we sever our ties to that. Second group, looking at economic backbone. The world-class telecommunications. It's just so obvious. It's painful that when you go to these local communities, many are still on dial-up modems. We just don't have the IT infrastructure that really will foster economic growth and the type of green tech jobs that we want to see within the region. Improving transportation system, we see that on average our region's trucking costs are 45 to 60% higher than a national average. I'm not exactly sure why that is. Joe can tell us later, but that's a staggering figure that puts us at an economic disadvantage when competing regionally. And then from harnessing renewable energy, we hear about the opportunities on the Tunkhill Plateau for wind energy and now the credit crunch impacting some of those projects. But the challenge and the opportunity really looking at our woody biomass stands, our opportunity for solar, for wind, for hydro is still very, very much alive. And then nothing is really a very good plan. It becomes a strategy when you have follow-through that really is engaged in really looking at preparing for future changes. In many cases, thinking, forecasting,